marvelous, you know. But it's also had some real bad things in it. For one thing, being slavery and you know, the people who were in power there, and I have ancestors that actually had a few slaves, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I wasn't there, I don't know, but those things were happening in a society that they felt was very Christian, I think, from all I've read.
Well,
and
yes. So this is a good conversation. Yeah.
You know, the old saying, nothing's new under the sun.
Right.
Kind of applies,
yes.
I think.
I agree. I think you're right. I agree with you. So I'm online now. We're online, and so I think this is a good and this is an important conversation because this is the most discussion we've had in months. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe we shouldn't be afraid of doing this. What we're doing, I guess, is we're talking about what we want out of the Bible, and the conversation quickly turned to what's going on in the world and in our country. So I think it'd be fair to have a real conversation about what the Bible is saying in Micah and Amos, what the prophets are saying about the nation of Israel, and comparing and contrasting that to our own country. So one of the things that you brought up was, that oftentimes it was brought up turning to the Lord, right? That we're turning away. Well, it's complicated because in our country, some of the worst, most awful things happened in our country when we were more turning to the Lord. Slavery. I mean, slavery is worse than anything that's happening now, I think. 300 million people died, and
just as bad.
And that was when slavery was happening, right when America was never more devoted. There was never a higher percentage of people in church than when slavery was happening, and everyone was okay with it for the most part. Not everyone, but there was a small minority of Christian abolitionists who were against it. But most of the country was in church every Sunday, devoutly singing their songs, and most of the country was just fine with slavery.
Yeah.
So remember the same thing happened when we looked at Amos and in Micah. God says, I don't care about your songs. I don't care about your worship. Because and they were very devout at this time too. Amos tells us. People were very worshipful, very church attendant, or whatever you might call it. But they were doing all sorts of things that were corrupt and greedy. So I don't know. I think when we look at our country and our world, I don't think things are worse. I think in some ways they're better, and some things are worse.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And we have to be careful too, I think, to look at it from biblical standards, and be careful about what the news is telling you to focus on that's bad. Whether you like liberal or conservative news, it's important to look at Christian values and evaluate what's happening in the country from that perspective, and not from the perspective of what your TV screen is telling you is to be angry about or afraid of. I think a lot of people today in our country are really motivated by fear. I mean, we brought that up earlier too, that when we go to the Bible, we're looking for comfort. And part of what we're comforting ourselves from is fear. We're afraid.
Which is what they're trying to make us
right.
afraid.
And I think, and depending on the news you watch, I can tell what news someone watches by what they're afraid of. If someone's afraid of socialism and immigrants, then I can tell what kind of news they watch. If someone's afraid of Nazis and I don't know, fascism. I can tell what
Marxism.
kind of news they watch. And for the most part, I think actually on both sides, the fear is, it's
The fear
maybe
is
not
that
totally
it's
unwarranted,
taking
but it's very
over
exaggerated, right?
And it doesn't work.
We're not in danger of becoming a socialist country or a Nazi country, but people are afraid of both those things, very afraid, and in some ways I think the priests in biblical times, in Micah's times, there's a lot of people trying to deceive you, right? And that's what Micah's problem is. You got prophets that are speaking to the people and telling them things that aren't true, right? And so they're all confused, and they don't really know who to listen to. And you've put yourself in their situation. How would you know whether to listen to these other prophets or Micah? And we have the advantage. We look back and we know Micah was right.
Yeah, and
Because
we
Micah
have
got into the Bible.
advantage Of having been a free country, I mean, where we have freedoms, and we
Yeah.
don't want to see those freedoms disappear.
Well, that's another. Another fear.
Yeah.
Another big fear is
Here,
losing
when they
freedoms.
say you can't go to church, that's going to be. That
Oh,
would be-
I don't think it will ever.
No,
be
we
that.
don't think that will happen, but it's there. There's some places in America where they're essentially. There's some church somewhere, I forget it, but they're not letting them in and trying to control that, and
Well,
they must not.
there's.
They must not.
But
Yeah, I
where
mean-
is this coming from? I would say from what? No, I only get
Oh, it's
news
just
from the
in
newspaper,
the
but,
more liberal places where they're so severe about shutting things down.
Well, there's lockdown.
Control.
There's more severe lockdowns in in certain parts of
And
the country,
those are the places that are.
and
really
that puts
falling apart.
limitations. That puts limitations on how churches can gather.
Right, right.
And there's a lot of people who are really afraid about that. They're afraid that somehow that'll turn into us being banned from going to church or something. I'm not too worried about that either.
For
But
meeting, but then there's all the spying on the internet, the spying on people, and people who have supported somebody that they, then they're not gonna get jobs, they're gonna be.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yeah. No.
So what similarities
Well-
and differences do you see between what's going on here in Micah and Amos and what's going on in our country? Remember the two judgments that the prophets bring, Amos and Micah anyway. The two judgments are mostly greed and inequality between the rich and the poor, and then idolatry. And then there's sub-themes like that there are false prophets deceiving people. So
That too, yeah.
And how is that different than now? Or now different?
or similar.
How
I
is
mean,
that
you could say it's very. I mean, I think to me, I see a lot of similarity, especially the economists tell us the gap between the rich and the poor in our country is growing. Right, the rich are getting richer.
many
For
percent
instance, in the last
Carry all the will.
during coronavirus, the nation's richest, the richest 20 billionaires got even richer over the last year and a half. Like coronavirus has made the
And
rich
who are they
even richer.
supporting in the politics?
The rich? Well, I
The
think
really rich ones are paying for their,
well, the rich people do, but I don't think, from what I know, I don't think there's much one side. The rich support both Democrats and Republicans. I don't think, but someone could fact check that.
I
But
think it's the worldwide rich, the very wealthy that are out, that aren't even Americans, that are causing a lot of trouble. So, with
Yeah.
their money, I mean, by paying for things.
yeah,
And raising money to get people out of jail. I mean, that have been burning and looting.
I'm not even sure what. I'm not sure what. I haven't
And
heard
that's
of.
the difference in what we hear on TV.
Yeah.
And maybe we should hear no TV. No, we need to know what's going on. It just has to be the truth.
Yeah, I would say
when
too.
we're getting the truth.
I would be this is just your pastor's advice. You're free to take it or leave it. I would be very careful what TV you watch and how much you watch. The real,
I would
whether
too.
it's I mean, I would be wary of especially the news channels that are popping up over the last few years that are super right wing. I think a lot of what they say isn't true, and I think a lot of it's designed to make you afraid of things that might not even be real or anything to worry about. And you've seen a lot of these, and I get ads for them, like the Epoch Times and all these news services that are that are feeding this point of view. If you're interested in that, I mean, I'm not going to tell you what politics to have or not have, but I'd be careful how much I filled my life with that sort of stuff, because it tends to I've noticed it tends to make people angry. One thing, very angry.
And I think
And very
that's
afraid.
the goal of these organizations.
Well, of course it's their goal, because once they get you afraid or angry,
Mhm.
then they can motivate you to vote how they want you to vote. Right.
Exactly.
So yeah, there's manipulation happening a lot.
Mhm.
And I worry that folks who are, not to say anything negative about those who are here, but the folks who are older are really susceptible to being made afraid of things like this. And the technology is so new, it's hard, I think, for some older folks to tell whether, for instance, some news source that pops up on Facebook or in your email that's telling you, oh, there's mobs of Antifa going to invade or whatever, and a lot of older, they don't know how to fact check that, right?
All you do is click the thing and snooze them. You don't want
Well, or to see, okay, because some kid in their mother's basement can make a
Right.
news website, blog, or something, and send it out to people over Facebook. You have to know where this stuff comes from and who made it, and how to check other sources of information to find out whether or not what you're reading is even true, or maybe exaggerated, or maybe you're only getting half the story, right? And folks who are older don't always have the experience
I'm
online
one
to
of
do that.
those
Right.
that does-
And that doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you not smart. Just you don't have experience
but
with.
I think I'm not going to let that into my mind. Well,
Well, and that's good. And
I'm
if-
naturally
suspicious.
suspicious of these things.
yeah.
you
Well, and
know.
you should be suspicious.
Yeah.
That's
I
good.
mean, AARP is what I read and get a lot of my information from,
Yeah.
because I feel like it's,
And AARP that's a pretty good source, and they don't try to make you afraid, and that's news the news has become entertainment. It's another thing that's happened,
yeah, very different.
and but in a weird masochistic way, like news has become entertainment in the sense of they try to show you the stuff that makes you the most upset, right? It's like a horror movie is entertaining. That's the way the news is entertaining.
Yeah.
So but it's smart, one, to be skeptical of everything you see, and two, I'd say limit how much you let it into your life. Yeah. Because you want to be shaped again. You should be more shaped by what the Bible says than what the news says. And that's
And
That's
this
a
has been
theme.
comforting
It's in
too,
God's
to see that
standards.
it's nothing really new.
good. That's good. I'm glad it has, Linda. That when we read this, Linda, if you can't hear and you're online, Linda's saying that reading all this, you find out that nothing that's happening today is special or new. It's the same kind of thing that's always happened. Yeah.
And I think sometimes we have the idea that it is new, you know, but it isn't, like you say, everything,
Might be in a different way,
Yeah.
but it's still the same.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
There's no different thing. There was no internet back then, and no news media the way there is now. But there was fake. There was fake news. The prophets, the false prophets, were fake news, and remember that it was not. That's why you have to always be skeptical, because back you couldn't tell Micah from the false prophets. I mean, you didn't know that Micah was a biblical prophet and that the false prophets were false. You didn't know that. They don't have signs on their foreheads that say false prophet, right?
And they don't today either.
No.
So,
Well, true, that's why, you have to,
So let's think about, if you're online too, one of the part of how this conversation started is thinking about what we want out of this get together that we have. We gather together, we read the Bible. What are we getting out of it? Part of what we want is comfort,
oh, yeah.
and part of what we want is that's the two things I'm hearing is we want kind of comfort, and but we also want new things. We want to look at parts of the Bible we haven't seen before. So knowledge, so we can do all that, but at the end of today we'll talk again about what we want to read next. I'm trying to think of things we could read that would be comforting, and maybe less familiar parts of the Bible, the parts of the Bible that you're not used to hearing all the time, but that are also comforting. And that's hard because a lot of the parts of the Bible that are comforting are the parts that people tend to repeat and use because they're comforting. But I don't know.
And I think probably all of us have different levels. I mean, and I'm lucky that I don't really feel like I'm lonely, and some of the things that people are experiencing now.
Yeah. Oh, a big thing we need. Many of us are lonely.
Mhm.
Sure.
Yeah, that's true. I know that.
Sometimes in my darker moment, I yeah, you guys are wonderful, but part of why people come is not to hear my wonderful Bible studies, but part of why you get together here is just to see each other and to have some interaction, to have some community. And that's not wrong. That's good. There's nothing wrong. That's a big part of what church is here for.
True.
So, okay. Well, that was
I
a good...
think this has been very good to talk about.
I do too. I think, otherwise, why are we reading it,
Yeah.
If we don't relate... Micah is talking about the corruption of the nation. And if we don't talk about comparisons to our own nation, why are we reading it, right? That's sort of... A lot of people don't like politics in church, but I don't know what to tell them. I'm sorry. You can't.
It's a part of our life.
It's a part of the Bible, right? And I guess here's my last point before we jump into Micah is, do you remember, so I'm going to start with some recent history. Do you remember when, and he's not a perfect man, I have lots of criticisms of Obama, but do you remember when Obama was running for president, and one of the big controversies was that he had attended a church where the pastor had preached a sermon that said, and the pastor said,
Pastor Wright.
Pastor Wright cursed America. You remember that? It was a big controversy.
CGD America,
Yeah.
What was it? I'm sorry.
He said, "God
20
damn." He
years.
said, "God damn America."
Oh.
That's what the pastor said, and that created a lot of controversy. It's shocking, especially because it's a curse word. But I want to say that and I don't know the whole sermon.
I think it was frequently. It was his
But
style of
Yeah.
that pastor, and they stayed in that church for
Yeah.
20 years.
and all I can say is that's no worse than what Mike and Amos are saying. About Israel, right? God's gonna damn Israel. And Israel deserves it. So if you want to have a biblical worldview, then you have to be willing to judge and condemn your own country if it sins. And America is a wonderful place, and we have lots of freedoms, and it's compared to other countries has less corruption in some ways, although we got plenty of corruption. I mean, there's lots of good things about America, so I don't hate America. There's also a lot of really bad things. We were founded upon slavery. We were founded upon stealing land that didn't belong to us.
Well, slavery was a normal thing in the world at the time. I mean, it wasn't like we needed the slaves. The people came over without slaves and did the work themselves also. So I don't feel like, and there were good, I'm not supporting slavery at all, but it's not necessarily so that the slave owners some were very good to their people, and the people that came that were under them were faithful to them too, as far as, so it wasn't all bad. The slavery wasn't bad. These people had a chance to start a life.
I think I disagree. I think slavery was really evil, and I think even the slave masters who were nice were really bad, and that God judges and condemns that in the strongest possible terms.
It's kind of the modern, where everybody has to have $15 an hour to start their life.
Yeah, I support that too.
I know, I figured.
That's a good thing.
Well, see, we were brought up at different times, and
Yeah.
and I like to salute. I like the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and I like the prayer before school starts, and all these things have been washed away. And
Yeah. Well, then there's no reason you can't be patriotic. That's not. That's the problem. Is you have to be able to be patriotic and sing the Star Spangled Banner and say the Pledge of Allegiance and honor them. You can honor veterans. You can do all that, but as a Christian, you also have to be willing to judge your nation based on biblical standards
That's
of
fine.
justice,
but don't
economic
race it.
justice. And one of the things that the prophets care about is economic justice, that the poor are better taken care of. So having the
That's
poor
fair
get paid more, to me, is probably honoring the biblical point of view. Right?
Say that one more time. What is honoring that they?
Well, the prophets are judging Israel because the poor are not treated well. And
Care of, yeah.
right, the poor are being denied. The poor are not having their needs met. Right?
That's a part of it, yeah. But
So doing things to help the poor get their needs met
that's important.
would be important and good from a biblical worldview. Now, from certain political points of view, helping the poor get their needs met is unpopular, I guess. But from a biblical point of view, there's not much to criticize about helping the poor.
Yes, but
Yeah.
things backfire.
It can.
I mean, when you jump the minimum wage, then more people lose their jobs, and there are less jobs, and then that's why we have to check out our own stuff in the store anymore, because
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
you
and then you have to ask.
It keeps us moving.
it's.
Yeah, that's not necessarily a bad thing, is it? Right? It's good for
There are
us.
people that could have jobs at a lesser, and check you, so you don't have.
Well, economically, people can't live on minimum wage.
Well,
That's
that's
the bottom
because they-
line right now.
Yeah, but
Well, and here's
all
the
it does
here's the
is-
thing is one of the things that makes the
Economics
prophets
is a-
makes the prophets mad,
It's
Amos,
a study.
is that there's the rich have plenty, and they could help the
Right.
poor, but they don't. And the same is true here. There's plenty of
That's
money.
very true.
There's plenty of money in this country. There's enough
Oh.
money. Nobody needs to
There are
not have
some
health
that
care.
are
Nobody
very
needs to
good
be
at that.
homeless.
Yeah.
There is enough. There is enough resources. There is. And but the problem is some people hoard too much of the resources and don't want to share. And that was the same problem back
And
then.
an awful lot is being wasted in our government.
There's a lot of
I mean,
waste.
both
Well, a lot of
sides the
corruption too.
government
Yeah.
Is so wasted
Yeah.
on
Okay, well we
frivolous.
we should read. So here's chapter 3. Here's Micah. Then I said, listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, should you not know justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones, who eat my people's flesh, strip off their skin and break their bones in pieces, who chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot. So that's obviously not literal, right?
I hope not.
They're not. First of all, pay attention to who is he talking to? Who does he open up? Chapter 3, verse 1. Who does he address? The leaders, right? So that's the people who are leaders are always held to the standard, to the higher standards, right? And notice that the judgment, the condemnation, is directed towards where? The top or the bottom? The top, right? So
Yeah,
Right.
the prophets direct their judgment and condemnation not to the least, not to the poor or the immigrants or the helpless or the orphans, like some might today, like you lazy poor people, you immigrants who just want to dole off the system. The prophets don't direct their judgment or condemnation to the bottom. They direct their judgment and condemnation to the top. That's the first point I want to make. And the second point is that this is metaphorical. They're not literally cannibals that eat the flesh of people, but they're talking about how the powerful take advantage of the poor and use them. They use the poor, right? And we see that today, right? The workers who have to put their lives at risk are the workers who are paid the least, right? While, like as I said, and this is a fact, over the last year, the top 20 billionaires have almost, I think, close to doubled their wealth. So they're making a lot of money while the people who are paid the least are getting COVID and dying. So I think Micah, if he were alive today, would say something very similar. That you people at the top, you're getting more and more, while the people at the bottom are dying and having to put their health at risk, and they have to do it for chump change. Okay. Verse 4, then they will cry out to the Lord, but he will not answer them. At that time he will hide his face from them because of the evil they have done, right? So notice again that it's not, the problem is not that these people are not religious enough in the sense of they don't go to church, right? They do. And God's saying, so presumably these are people who are going to go to church and they're going to pray. But Micah says when they do pray, I'm not going to listen to them because they have mistreated the poor. So these people are going to cry to God and God's going to ignore them. Verse 5, this is what the Lord says, as for the prophets who lead my people astray, right? The fake news. As for those who lie to the people, who feed them the stories that make them angry or afraid of made up things, or who make false promises. As for the false prophets who lead my people astray, if one feeds them, they proclaim peace. If he does not, they prepare to wage war against him. Which is, again, that goes back to what he said before, right? When the prophets work for money, if you pay them, they're going to say nice things. And if you don't pay them, they're not going to say nice things. Verse 6, therefore night will come over you without visions, and darkness without divination. The sun will set for the prophets, and the day will go dark for them. The seers will be ashamed, and the diviners disgraced. They will all cover their faces because there is no answer from God. So prophets, diviners, seers, those are all religious leaders, but you can think of them, I think a valid analogy for the false prophets or the seers would be, all these news sources that have popped up in the last 5 years that are pumping stories into people's heads.
well, and also, some even the televangelist, I kinda have
Oh,
a hard time with.
Televangelists would be another good.
Yeah, I know it, they just,
Yeah,
I just can't abide by them, I mean.
they're hard. They're hard.
Yeah,
I wouldn't wait.
and
Yeah,
yet there are just people that they have such a big following,
yeah.
and.
That's dismaying to me as
And
a.
the mega churches,
Yeah.
things like this, I don't know, I guess it's my mentality.
No, the televangelists, radio, all that. I don't. As a pastor, it's frustrating to me because I don't know why you would get your religion from those sources when you could come here. And I get that's self-serving, but I don't know. I don't care.
And
I don't know why you-
they really prey on people, well, for instance, my sister, who is older than me quite a bit, and she sometimes can't sleep at night, and she'll get up and watch those, and they're always asking for money and stuff.
They love to ask for money.
And,
Well, and
you
the
know,
thing is,
and
that
I
they're
mean,
and
she
they're
really
idiots. I'm sorry,
believes
they're
them.
dumb. They're poorly educated. They're not well informed. They don't know the scriptures. Most of them can't study the text in the original languages. Maybe some of them can, but they are very polished. They put
Oh, yeah.
you put the
Yeah.
televangelist up there in a nice suit, and he's got Joel Osteen has a perfect
Oh,
white
yeah.
smile,
Right.
right? So he
But,
must. So people give them authority as if they knew things, but they don't know anything. They're very poor. 99% of what you see on TV and the radio that's religious is worth very little.
Well, that's my opinion.
And I don't know why people would. And maybe maybe people do. Like you said, you have a friend. She gets up in the middle of the night. Well, the church isn't open then, and she needs some. She's looking for some kind of comfort, right? And at 3 o'clock in the morning, she can't come here, I guess. Although, but she could go on Facebook and watch these.
Well,
These
she
are-
doesn't
these stay
have
on there
any of
after.
that. It's my 93-year-old sister.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
you know.
but yeah, there's
but,
there's a lot of that too. A lot of false religion today too. Just like back then, you have false prophets, and today you have a lot of false Christian teachers. People don't like when I say that though, and I don't know why exactly. I wonder if you could tell me why. I mean, it's not everybody, but some people, they don't like it when, I guess, yeah, I don't. They seem to get upset when I point out that a lot of the teachers out there who say that they're Christian are really either dishonest or poorly informed. It's a nice way to put it. I don't know why that they don't. Any ideas why?
Maybe part of it is that they just think because they are preaching, they think the word of God, that they're
Right.
good people.
That we should be
mean,
on the
yeah.
same team, and
Mhm.
we should, and they're Christians, and we're Christians, and we should be supportive, and we should be nice to to people who are on the same team. But I can see that point, but you have to be careful because not everybody who wears the jersey is on your team. That's the issue back then, right? That these, and you feel bad for the people, right? Because remember they had. If you lived during Micah's time and you heard Micah say this, how would you know whether to believe Micah or the prophets that Micah is condemning? And that makes people uncomfortable. I think maybe that's why it makes people upset. It makes them uncomfortable because then they worry, well, how am I supposed to know whether I should listen to Pastor Aaron or the guy on TV? How do I know? Because I could be lying. I could be the one who's full of it and poorly informed and a deceiver. And how do you know whether you should listen to the televangelist or to me?
Maybe they've just never gone to a legitimate church
That could be, yeah, that could be too.
where they've had proper
Yeah,
instruction,
there
and
could be
so
something.
they don't know the different.
Yeah. I mean, I would hope
No
that if you
experience
listen,
in
I would hope that if you listen to me long enough and you listen to the televangelist long enough, you could tell the difference between what we know.
Well, they kind of say what they know people want to hear,
Well, yeah,
Tell it.
well, that right. They,
you know,
and that's
They-
one marker to be suspicious of.
right,
Right?
Right.
According to the Bible, if a prophet is always telling people whatever they want, whatever, and what do they want to hear? Well, they want to hear what confirms what they already think, right? So they don't want to be taught new things.
Mhm.
They want to be told that what they already know is right.
Mm.
And so the false prophets often do that. Rather than teaching you, they will tell you that what you already know is right and make you feel proud about it.
Loudly.
And they do it loudly.
Yeah.
Sure.
They used to, I had cousins who used to come and get us to take us to hear the tent, the big tents.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
And we would just sit in the back and laugh.
How old were you, Alice, when
My
you did
brother and I, because they were so loud.
Yeah.
Oh, they were so
Well,
loud.
and I think that's it. Again, and this is, you have to decide for yourself who you're going to listen
Was
to.
that more the Pentecostal?
But if
or
it-
Yes,
Screaming
d-
at
very
God?
much so.
if the teacher or the preacher does not cause you to think or teach you new things, make you think things that you never thought before, which is uncomfortable, right? We already talked about that. Then they're probably not worth much, right? A true teacher will challenge you and make you a little uncomfortable in the sense of make you see a new perspective and challenge you to think. Whereas a false preacher is going to do what? Probably make you feel either fear or comfort, and the comfort will be false, and the fear will be false too. But you're just you're just going to feel emotions when you listen to a false preacher, and those emotions can be addictive. Which is another. Someone's going to have to. Why do people continue to watch news that makes them constantly feel afraid and angry? Right. And I'm not I mean, I know you, but so do I. I mean, a lot of people are like I see all the time.
Well, I know
They're
what's going
they're
on.
watching this news that makes them so mad, right, or fearful, but they keep coming back again and again and again. It's like addicting, and why? I mean, what?
Yeah, definitely.
But there is those feelings, strong feelings. I think strong feelings are addicting, and that's why people like horror movies. I mean, not everyone likes horror movies,
Oh,
but
no.
there's a lot of people who love horror movies,
I
and
can't
it's
stand
those
them.
strong emotions make you feel alive, right?
Yeah.
They're intense experiences, especially if you're bored, right? If you're bored, an intense experience, even if it's fear or anger, is preferable over total boredom and nothing. Anyway, okay, we got to get going because we've only made it through half a chapter. So but the prophet says what? I'm going to take away the false prophets. You're not going to get any more visions, and no one's going to listen to you. And that's comforting actually. May that prophecy be fulfilled. Would that the fake news and the false teachers would be silenced somehow, and that no one would listen to them. But that's what Micah predicts. Verse 8, but as for me, I am filled with power with the Spirit of the Lord and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, to Israel his sin. And that's what I said before, is that the biblical worldview, the prophet is declaring to Israel its sin. So in other words, a true prophet today would be willing to declare to America its transgression and its sin. So it might sound offensive, and it maybe would be unwise words to say, to curse America, but to declare, to be willing to be honest biblically what the sins of America are, whether it be slavery, whether it be corruption, whether it be greed, whether it be violence,
Or turning away from God.
or turning away from God and worshiping
they
idols.
Are preaching at these days.
That's all. That all needs to be on the table. And again, that doesn't mean you can't be patriotic. I'm not telling you can't love the flag and you can say the Pledge of Allegiance.
America was judo
You can be
Christian
proud of all the good things about
value.
America, but you also have to be willing to name the bad. Okay, verse 9. Hear this, you leaders of the house of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, who despise justice and distort all that is right, who build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with wickedness. Right? They build up the country using wickedness. Right? And I would say slavery would be an example of that. You build up the country using slavery, or you build up the country using military power. Either one of those is bad, right? You're building up the country with bloodshed, right? So if your country is built on war, that's probably not good from a biblical point of view. So you build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with wickedness. Her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Again, so the issue of economics constantly comes up. God does this problem of greed is a big problem, and a biblical worldview would always be very critical of greed. And notice, what do you see criticized more and just in what we've read? You've all been sitting here. Have the prophets talked once about laziness? Laziness, as the prophet said, "Oh, you lazy people who don't get jobs and sit at home." No. But the prophets have condemned greed. Right? So that's something to think about if you want to have a biblical worldview of the country today. Yet they lean upon the Lord and say, "Is not the Lord among us?" Right? So again, these are religious people. They are outwardly pious, meaning they call upon the Lord. These people pray. They sing their praise hymns in church. But Micah says, verse 12, "Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The Temple Hill, a mound overgrown with thickets." Right? So your city, Jerusalem, will be destroyed. And I think this might be one of the earliest points where the destruction of the temple is prophesied. Notice that there. That's huge. Don't miss that. Verse 12, Micah says, "The Temple Hill will become a mound overgrown with thickets." You got to stop and think how amazing that is, that God would destroy his own temple or cause as punishment for the injustice of the nation, right? That God cares so much about the poor and the needy and cares so much about the idolatry that God would even be willing to burn down the churches, or that's the equivalent. The temple was the temple was the temple. There was only one temple, and it was God's temple. It was the symbol of God in Israel, that he would destroy his own temple just to punish these injustices. Really shows you the character of God. Okay, chapter 4. Let's see if we can finish chapter 4 in 5 minutes. "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains." So notice that right after the prophecy of the temple being destroyed is a prophecy that the temple will be established. Right? So that teaches us that God's judgment is always followed by a recovery or restoration, right? When God judges Israel, he never completely just gets rid of it, right? He's not going to do that. God's not going to just wipe out Israel and choose some other nation, right? He's going to punish Israel. His judgment is going to fall on them, but they're always going to come out of it on the other side. And I think that that's a model for how judgment works for us too.
That's also a comfort when we're worried right now.
Yeah, I don't believe that
As bad as it's getting.
I don't believe that anybody will be permanently lost, right? I think people might be temporarily lost and punished, but I don't think anyone is ever eternally hopeless, right? Because Israel is, if anyone would be lost, it'd be Israel, right? They couldn't get it right. Okay, verse 2, many nations will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain, the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between many peoples and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. So again, the promise, this is hopeful, that there will come a time when God establishes his temple in Jerusalem and the word of God will go out from Jerusalem, and one of the things that will happen is that war will end. Verse 4, every man will sit under his own vine and under his own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. That's comforting. For the Lord Almighty has spoken, all the nations may walk in the name of their gods. We will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Okay, verse 6. In that day, declares the Lord, and this is the day when, in the last days, right? That's how chapter 4 starts, in the last days. That's where we get the last, in Greek, last is eschaton. That's the word last. So if you ever heard the word eschatology, that's just the study of the last things. So the last days, the study of the last days. So it sounds like a fancy word, but you shouldn't be afraid of it. It's just a simple word that means. So in the end, this is where history is going, according to Micah. In the last days, that's verse 4, and then verse 6. In that day, which refers back to verse 1. In the last days, declares the Lord, I will gather the lame, I will assemble the exiles, and those I have brought to grief. I will make the lame a remnant, those driven away a strong nation. The Lord will rule over them in Mount Zion from that day and forever. Right? So those that God has punished, he will eventually gather them together and restore them. Verse 8, as for you, O watchtower of the flock, O stronghold of the daughter of Zion, the former dominion will be restored to you. That word, restoration, right? Judgment and then restoration. That's the pattern. Verse 9, why do you now cry aloud? Have you no king? Has your counselor perished? The pain seizes you like that of a woman in labor. Writhe in agony, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. For now you must leave the city to camp in the open field. You will go to Babylon. There you will be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you out of the hand of your enemies. But now many nations are gathered against you. They say, let her be defiled. Let our eyes gloat over Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan. He who gathers them like sheaves to the threshing floor. Rise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, for I will give you horns of iron. I will give you hoofs of bronze, and you will break to pieces many nations. You will devote their ill-gotten gains to the Lord, their wealth to the Lord of all the earth. So he's saying, right now you're in pain. Right now you're suffering. But he says that's like the pain of labor. You will suffer. You will. Where are you going to go? Where does he say you're going to go? Suffer. Verse 10.
You will go to Babylon.
Yes, say it louder.
You will go to
You will go to
Babylon.
you will go to
There
Babylon.
Be
That-
rescued.
Yes, you will go to Babylon, but there you'll be rescued, right? So you're going to suffer, and that's the judgment, but after you've suffered, you'll be restored. And when you're restored, then all these nations that are mocking you and that are gloating over your destruction, you're going to rule over them, is what he says. Okay, that's chapter 4.
So next week is what?
So next week we'll do chapter 5, and and we should finish. And think about what you would like to read after we finish Micah. We could do some. I'll just throw some things out there. We could do some more Old Testament things that we haven't done before. We could go on to read Hosea. We could do Ezekiel. Have we done Ezekiel?
I don't think so.
There's some weird stuff in Ezekiel, but it's interesting. We could do. I don't think we've ever done. Have we read Have we done 1st and 2nd Samuel? Have we read the story of David? I think we have, but it's been a while. I think we've done it, but it's been a while. We could
That
also
might be
do.
kinda good.
We could also do Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, which are kind of the history of all the kings that are ruling during this time of the prophets. We could do Judges. I know we've never done Judges. Although I don't know how comforting that is, because Judges is a pretty wild, violent book. In the New Testament, we could do the book of Revelation, and there is comfort in the book of Revelation. We could do. We've done a lot of the New Testament recently, though. We could do some of Paul's letters. The last one we did was Romans, but we could do like 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians. We could do some of those letters. So, those are all. I'm just throwing all those things.
Jesus.
There's a lot of choices, and yeah, I'd like to hear from everybody. So thanks for everybody who joined in, for Juliana, Patty, Linda, Alice, Shirley, Joni, Dorothy. Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you learned something. I hope that it was good to relate what the prophets are saying to our world and to us. And think about what you want to do next. It sounds like you're pretty content. Most of you probably be okay with whatever we choose. But if you,
I think so too.
but it's helpful. Okay, let me close this in prayer. Lord, we need comfort because the world is sort of scary, and there is a lot of violence in it, and a lot of sin, a lot of darkness, a lot of corruption. So Lord, help us to take comfort in your promises and your word. And help us to look at the world from a biblical point of view, to judge the world and ourselves, not by the standards of the news, but by the standards of the Bible. And what you say is important, and what you say is right and wrong. Lord, teach us to see the world through your eyes. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
You're welcome.
very